Samuel Mackenzie had 30 seconds to make an impossible choice: save two dying children and their wounded protector, or save himself. What he chose brought 250 Sioux warriors to his door, but not for war, for something far more powerful. This story will challenge everything you think you know about courage, about family, about the bonds that connect us across every boundary we build. But first, you need to understand what Sam found in that tornado's destruction. Because what the bear was hiding would change 3 lives forever. And when the Sioux Nation learned the truth, they responded in a way that would restore your faith in humanity. April 1975, South Dakota farmland. Samuel Mackenzie was battening down for the worst tornado season in 20 years. When the world turned green and deadly, the sky had been wrong all day. Not just cloudy, but sick-looking, the color of old bruises with an edge like infected wounds. Sam had seen enough prairie storms to know when nature was planning something biblical. And this felt like the kind of weather that rewrite maps. He was 42 years old, a widower who'd been working this same stretch of Dakota earth since. He came home from Korea with shrapnel in his leg and ghosts in his head. The kind of man who talked more to his cattle than to people. Not from unfriendliness, but from a deep understanding that most conversations were just noise covering up what folks were really thinking. The tornado sirens had been wailing for 20 minutes when Sam heard something that made his blood freeze. Not the wind, not the freight train roar of the twister bearing down on him. Something else. Crying. Human crying. High-pitched. Desperate. Coming from the direction of the old storm cellar that had been abandoned since his grandfather's time. Every instinct screamed at him to get to his own shelter. The tornado was maybe 2 miles out and closing fast. A mile-wide finger of God's own fury that was turning everything in its path into kindling. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to hunker down and wait for the storm to pass. But that crying, it was small, young, and absolutely terrified. Sam grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the sound, his bad leg protesting with every step. The abandoned cellar was built into a hillside about a quarter-mile from his house. Stone walls and a heavy wooden door that his great-grandfather had installed in 1892. It should have been empty, should have been. But as he got closer, Sam could see that something was very wrong. The hillside had partially collapsed, probably from the heavy rains they'd been having all week. The cellar door was buried under tons of earth and broken timber. And from somewhere inside that tomb, children were crying. The tornado was close. Enough now that Sam could feel it in his bones. A pressure that made his teeth ache and his heart stutter. Maybe 5 minutes before it hit. Maybe less. He had no business trying to dig through a cave-in with a tornado bearing down on him. He had no equipment, no help, and no time. But those voices, 2 of them, very young, very scared, speaking, words he didn't recognize but understood perfectly. Please help us. Please don't leave us here to die. Sam started digging with his bare hands, throwing aside chunks of sandstone and rotted wood with desperate efficiency. The crying got louder as he worked, more urgent. And then he heard something else that made him freeze, a sound like nothing he'd ever heard. Low, rumbling, definitely not human. Something was alive in there with those children, something big. The tornado was maybe 2 minutes out when Sam finally cleared enough debris to see into the cellar. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness and revealed a sight that would stay with him for the rest of his life. 2 little girls, Native American by their features, with long black hair and traditional beaded clothing. Twins, maybe 6 years old, huddled together in the corner of the stone cellar, surrounded by fallen timber and chunks of earth. And standing over them, massive and magnificent and clearly injured, was a brown bear. The bear had to weigh 400 pounds, maybe more. Its left shoulder was matted with blood where a piece of timber had gouged deep. But despite its obvious pain, despite the terror of the approaching storm, it hadn't abandoned the children. It stood guard over them with the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her cubs. When the bear saw Sam's light, it reared up on its hind legs and let out a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. A warning, a challenge. These are mine. I've been protecting them. Don't hurt them. Sam had maybe 90 seconds before the tornado hit. 90 seconds to decide whether to try to save 2 children and a wounded bear, or get to safety and hope they'd somehow survive on their own. Looking into that bear's eyes, seeing the intelligence there, the loyalty, the love so fierce it transcended species, Sam knew he couldn't leave any of them behind. This bear had saved these children's lives, had sheltered them with its own body, kept them alive when everything else had failed. Sam wasn't going to let any of them die alone. If you're already invested in this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next, you won't want to miss a single episode of this series. Getting the children out was the easy part. They were small enough to lift through the gap Sam had cleared, and despite their fear, they seemed to understand that he was there to help. They spoke to him in what he later learned was Lakota, their voices soft and musical even through their tears. The bear was a different challenge entirely. The animal was clearly suffering, its injured shoulder making every movement painful, but it refused to leave the cellar, refused to abandon its post. Even as the tornado's roar grew closer, Sam could see the intelligence in its dark eyes, could almost hear it thinking, "How do I know you won't hurt them once I'm gone?" Sam had about 40 seconds to establish trust with a 400-pound predator. While a tornado bore down on them all, he did the only thing he could think of. He started talking. "Easy, friend, easy. I'm here to help." His voice was the same calm tone he used with spooked cattle, but steadier somehow, more certain. "Those girls, they're safe now, but you're hurt, and that storm's going to kill us all if we don't move." The bear's ears twitched. It was listening. "I don't know your story," Sam continued, never taking his eyes off the massive animal. "Don't know how you ended up protecting these little ones, but I'm glad you were here. They wouldn't have made it without you." Thunder crashed overhead, so close Sam felt it in his chest. 20 seconds, maybe less. "Come on, friend," he said, extending his hands slowly toward the bear. "Trust me, just this once." For a moment that lasted forever, man and bear regarded each other, two creatures who had no business trusting each other, brought together by circumstance and the simple fact that sometimes doing the right thing means risking everything. Then the bear moved, not quickly and not without pain, but with a dignity that took Sam's breath away. The massive animal limped toward the opening, accepting Sam's help because the alternative was death for them all. Sam managed to widen the gap just enough for the bear to squeeze through, its fur scraping against broken stone, its breathing labored but determined. The twins followed, their small hands gripping Sam's jacket as he led them away from the collapsing cellar. They made it to Sam's storm shelter with maybe 10 seconds to spare. The tornado hit like the end of the world. Sam's farmhouse, which had stood for 70 years, disappeared in less than 30 seconds. His barn, his silos, his truck, everything he owned above ground was scattered across 3 counties. In the space of a heartbeat, but in the shelter, carved deep into bedrock and reinforced with steel beams, Sam held to frightened children while a wounded bear kept watch by the door. Outside, the world was ending. Inside, somehow, life was beginning again. The twins had names, Ayanna and Elisa. Ayanna meant eternal blossom, and Elisa meant truthful. They were 6 years old, just as Sam had guessed, and they had been missing for days. The bear, they told him in broken English mixed with Lakota, was called Motto, bear in their language. He had found them after they'd gotten lost during a family camping trip, led them to shelter, brought them food, protected them from other predators. For days, a wild animal had served as their guardian, their protector, their only family. Sam had grown up hearing stories from his Cherokee grandmother, tales of spirit animals, guardians that appeared when needed most. He wasn't particularly spiritual these days, hadn't been since Korea knocked most of the faith out of him, but looking at this magnificent bear, seeing how it had risked everything to protect 2 children who weren't even its own species, some things didn't need explaining, they just needed honoring. When the storm passed and they emerged from the shelter, Sam's world had been erased. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, was gone. Insurance would cover some of it, maybe, but at 42, starting over felt like climbing a mountain with a broken leg. But the twins were alive. The bear was alive, and somehow, That felt like the only thing that mattered. Sam's first call was to the sheriff. Jim Crow Dog had been a friend since high school, one of the few people who understood why Sam had chosen solitude over society. After coming home from the war, Jesus, Sam. Jim's voice crackled through the radio. You found what? Where? Too little. Girls, Sioux, I think. Maybe 6 years old. They're twins. Been missing for days. Any idea where they came from? Sam looked at the children, now sitting quietly beside the bear. All three of them watching him with expressions of complete trust. They were with a bear. Motto. They call him. He's been protecting them. A bear, injured. Still here, still watching. Over them like they're his own cubs. There was a long pause. Sam, you know how that sounds, right? I know how it sounds. I also know what I saw. But as the day wore on, the mystery only deepened. No missing persons reports matched the twins' description. No Sioux families in the area had reported missing children. It was as if the girls had materialized from the storm itself. The bear, meanwhile, was recovering with remarkable speed. Sam had managed to clean and bandage the shoulder while the animal standing perfectly still. During the procedure, as if it understood what was happening. By evening, Motto was alert and eating, accepting strips of venison with dignified gratitude. And he never stopped watching the children. Sam found himself studying the interaction between bear and girls. There was something there, a connection that went beyond simple coincidence. When one of the twins stirred in her sleep, the bear's head would lift. When the children were awake, the animal would make soft sounds that seemed to comfort them. Late that afternoon, a tribal physician arrived from the Pine Ridge Reservation. Dr. Mary Crow Feather was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm competence that inspired immediate trust. She examined the children with gentle thoroughness, speaking to them in Lakota and receiving shy but responsive answers. Their names are Ayanna and Elisa, she told Sam after the examination. They're 6 years old, just as you thought, and they have quite a story to tell. Where did they come from? Dr. Crow Feather's expression darkened. Their parents died in a flash flood 3 weeks ago. The girls were supposed to be placed with relatives in Montana, but they ran away from temporary foster care the night before they were to be transferred. No one's seen them since. Search teams assumed they died in the wilderness. Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach. 3 weeks. 2 6-year-old children had survived alone in the South Dakota wilderness for 3 weeks. How is that possible? Dr. Crow Feather looked at the bear, now resting peacefully beside the twins. Its massive form a picture of gentle protection. The girls say Motto found them after they ran away, led them to shelter, brought them food, protected them from predators. They've been living together ever since. Sam stared at the magnificent animal. A bear raised them. According to Lakota tradition, bears are sacred symbols of strength, healing, and protection. When someone dies, especially someone young or innocent, bears sometimes appear to guide the survivors. You're saying their parents sent this bear to protect them? Dr. Crow Feather smiled. I'm saying that in 3 weeks of searching, professional trackers, search and rescue teams, and state police couldn't find any trace of these children. But you found them in the middle of a tornado, protected by a wild animal that had no earthly reason to care whether they lived or died. That evening, as Sam prepared dinner for his unusual household, he found himself thinking about connections, about the invisible threads that sometimes link lives in ways that defy explanation. The twins were eating now, slowly gaining strength. They still spoke primarily in Lakota, but they'd begun to trust him, accepting food from his hands and allowing him to check their scrapes and bruises. And the bear watched everything with those intelligent dark eyes, as if it were cataloging his every action for some unseen authority. Sam was just settling in for the night when he heard the sound that would change everything. Drums. Distant at first, barely audible over the evening wind, but growing closer, growing louder. And with them, the sound of horses. Many horses. Sam stepped outside and looked toward the eastern horizon, where the first stars were appearing in the clear post-storm sky. There, silhouetted against the dying light, was something that belonged to another century. Riders, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, coming toward his devastated farm with the steady, purposeful pace of an army on the march. But not an army of conquest, an army of honor. Sam didn't know it yet, but word had spread through the Sioux nation faster than wildfire. Word of the twin girls who'd survived impossible odds. Word of the bear that had protected them. Word of the white farmer who'd risked his life to save them all. And now, the nation was coming to respond. All of it. Okay, pause for a second. If this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, smash that like button, because we're about to see what happens when an entire nation says thank you to one man's courage. Dawn came like a symphony of thunder, but this time the sound wasn't from the sky. It was hooves. 250 horses moving in perfect formation across the South Dakota prairie, carrying riders whose presence transformed the landscape from empty farmland into something that pulsed with ancient power and modern purpose. Sam stood in the ruins of his front yard, coffee mug forgotten in his hands, watching the most magnificent sight he'd ever witnessed. The Sioux Nation hadn't just sent representatives, they'd sent everyone. Chiefs in traditional regalia rode alongside young warriors in modern clothes. Elders who remembered the old ways shared the formation with teenagers who carried smartphones alongside sacred medicine bundles. Women, men, children, entire families had made the journey to this remote corner of South Dakota. And at their head rode a man Sam recognized from newspaper photos, Chief Joseph Iron Horse, one of the most respected Native American leaders in the country and a man whose word carried weight from Washington to the reservations. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the ruins of Sam's house, arranged in a great semicircle that seemed to embrace his devastated property without threatening it. The silence that followed was profound. 250 people and 250 horses, waiting with the kind of patience that could only come from a culture that measured time and generations rather than minutes. Chief Iron Horse rode forward alone, his horse's hooves marking a steady rhythm in the morning stillness. He was a man in his 60s with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that held both ancient wisdom and sharp modern intelligence. Samuel Mackenzie, the chief said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air, "I have come to thank you for saving my daughters." Sam blinked. "Your daughters? All Sioux children are my daughters." The chief replied, "But Ayanna and Elisa, their father was my nephew. Their blood is my blood. Their survival is a gift beyond price." Behind the chief, the massive gathering remained motionless, waiting. Sam could feel their collective attention like a physical weight. 250 pairs of eyes focused on this moment with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "I just did what anyone would do," Sam said, his voice sounding small and inadequate. Chief Iron Horse smiled, but it wasn't the polite expression Sam expected. It was something deeper, warmer, touched with a sadness that spoke of too many losses and too few victories. "No," the chief said, "you did what almost no one would do. You risked your life in a tornado to save children who weren't yours, protected by a creature you had no obligation to help. And you did it not because it was easy, but because it was right." The chief dismounted, his movements fluid and purposeful. "May I see them?" Sam nodded and led the way to the storm shelter, acutely conscious of the devastation around them, compared to the magnificence of the gathering outside. But Chief Iron Horse showed no judgment, only focused attention as he descended into the shelter where the twins sat with Motto, all three looking up with expressions of recognition and wonder. The chief spoke to them in Lakota, his voice gentle and musical. The girls responded eagerly, their own voices growing stronger as they told their story in their native language. Sam couldn't understand the words, but he could read the emotions: fear, loss, gratitude, and something that might have been wonder. And through it all, the bear watched from its position beside the children, those dark eyes tracking every movement, every expression, as if it were the guardian of truth itself. When the conversation ended, Chief Iron Horse turned to Sam with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of history. "They tell me Motto spoke to them," he said quietly, "in their dreams after their parents died. He told them to run from the foster home, promised to keep them safe until help came. They say he has been their mother and father both, bringing them food, leading them to water, protecting them from harm." Sam looked at the magnificent bear, now grooming its fur with calm dignity. "Is that possible?" In your world, perhaps not. In ours, the chief shrugged. We have always known that love transcends death, that the spirits of those who pass watch over those they leave behind. Sometimes they send messengers. He approached the bear, which regarded him with what appeared to be recognition. Chief Iron Horse spoke to it in Lakota, the same gentle tone he'd used with the children. The bear made a soft sound in response. I have asked Motto if he wishes to return to the wild or stay with the children, the chief said. He says his duty is not yet finished. Chief Iron Horse walked to the shelter entrance, looking out at the assembled nation, waiting in respectful silence. Do you know what it means when the Sioux Nation rides together like this? Sam shook his head. It hasn't happened in living memory, not since the cavalry wars, when we were fighting for our very survival. But there are moments, rare moments, when something happens that reminds us who we are, who we can be, who we must be. The chief turned back to Sam, his expression intense. 3 weeks ago, 2 of our children faced death alone in the wilderness. By every law of nature and probability, they should have died. Instead, they were protected by a sacred messenger and ultimately saved by a man who chose courage over safety. He paused, letting the words settle. That is not just a rescue, Mr. Mackenzie. That is a sign, a reminder that the old ways, the ways of honor, sacrifice, and putting others before ourselves still have power in this world. Sam felt overwhelmed, humbled by the weight of meaning these people were attaching to what he still thought of as simple human decency. What happens now? Chief Iron Horse smiled, and this time it was purely joyful. Now, we honor you as our traditions demand, and we ensure that the children and their bear have everything they need to thrive. What followed was unlike anything Sam had ever experienced. The Sioux Nation had not come empty-handed. As the chief led Sam outside, he saw that many of the riders carried bundles, bags, and carefully wrapped packages. Others led pack horses loaded with supplies. The children will need a home, Chief Iron Horse explained as people began dismounting and organizing themselves with practiced efficiency. According to our laws and customs, they should return to the reservation, but they have made it clear that they wish to stay with you and their bear. Sam's heart clenched. I'm not set up for children. I lost everything in the tornado. I don't even have a house anymore. Yes, the chief said simply, but you are not alone anymore. What happened next unfolded like a vision from another time. The Sioux Nation had brought everything needed to transform Sam's devastated property into a place suitable for raising children. Carpenters began framing a new house, larger and stronger than the one the tornado had taken. Others started construction on a proper shelter for the bear, large enough for the massive animal to move freely, but secure enough to keep it safe. Women set up outdoor kitchens and began preparing enough food to feed an army. Children played in the cleared areas under the watchful eyes of elders, who told stories in both Lakota and English. Teenagers unpacked boxes of clothing, toys, and books, everything to little girls would need to build a new life. And through it all, the bear watched from its position near the children, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to express approval. How is this possible? Sam asked Dr. Crowfeather as he watched his world transform around him. The logistics alone. Mary smiled. When the Sioux Nation decides to act, we act completely. Word went out 2 days ago. As soon as we realized what had happened, every family contributed something. Every person with relevant skills volunteered their time. This is what community looks like when it's working the way it's supposed to. By midday, Sam's property looked like a thriving homestead rather than a tornado's aftermath. The new house had running water, electricity, and enough space for a family. The bear's enclosure was a masterpiece of engineering, designed to be both functional and beautiful. But it was the legal transformation that truly amazed him. We've petitioned the state for emergency guardianship, Chief Iron Horse explained as they watched Ayanna and Elisa explore their new playground. Given the unusual circumstances and the children's clearly expressed wishes, it should be approved within days. But I'm not Sioux, no, but you are family now. We have adoption ceremonies for situations like this. Sam felt something crack open in his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart after too many losses, too many disappointments. I don't know how to be a father. I tried once years ago. Lost my wife and baby in childbirth. Never tried again. Chief. Iron Horse was quiet for a long moment, watching the twins chase butterflies while the bear observed from its enclosure. Fatherhood isn't about perfection, he said finally. It's about showing up, choosing love over fear, being willing to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. He looked at Sam directly. You've already proven you can do that. As evening approached, the Sioux Nation began preparing for something Sam hadn't expected, a ceremony. Not for him, but for the bear. Motto has completed a sacred trust, Chief Iron Horse explained as people gathered in a great circle round the bear's enclosure. He answered the call of two children in desperate need, protected them against impossible odds, and led them to safety. Such service must be honored. What followed was unlike anything Sam had ever witnessed. Drums began a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the earth's own heartbeat. Voices rose in ancient songs that carried the weight of centuries. Sacred herbs filled the air with smoke that was said to carry prayers to the spirit world. And at the center of it all, the bear stood motionless in its enclosure, head high, eyes reflecting the firelight with what could only be described as dignity. When the ceremony ended, Chief Iron Horse approached the enclosure alone. He spoke to the bear in Lakota, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed silence. The bear listened intently, then stood on its hind legs in what appeared to be acknowledgement. I have told Motto that his duty is complete, the chief said to Sam. The children are safe, protected, loved. He may return to the wild or stay as he chooses. Sam looked at the magnificent bear, thinking about choice and duty, and the invisible bonds that connect all living things. What did he say? Chief Iron Horse smiled. He said he will stay until the children no longer need protection. Bears adopt for life, you know, and sometimes they adopt across species. If this story is reminding you why you still believe in good people, do me a favor, hit that notification bell, because this is just the beginning of Sam's journey. 1 year later, Samuel Mackenzie stood in his new kitchen, making breakfast for the most unusual family in South Dakota. The house the Sioux Nation had built was beautiful, larger than his old one, with wide windows that looked out over the prairie, and a wraparound porch where the twins liked to sit in the evenings. But the real magic wasn't in the architecture. It was in the laughter that echoed from rooms that had once been silent, in the small voices that called him Papa Sam into languages, in the knowledge that love could rebuild anything that storms destroyed. Ayanna and Elisa, now 7 years old and fluent in both Lakota and English, had grown into confident, happy children who moved between two worlds with the ease of those born to bridge cultures. They could explain traditional Sioux customs to curious visitors and teach other children how to approach Motto safely. Their trauma hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into strength. And Motto had become something unprecedented in wildlife management. The bear lived in an enclosure that was always open during daylight hours. He could leave anytime he chose. Instead, he had become the family's protector, teacher, and friend. Wildlife biologists came from around the world to study what they called interspecies adoption behavior. Sam just called it family. The Mackenzie Wildlife Education Center had opened 6 months ago, built on the same land where a tornado had once erased everything Sam owned. It specialized in teaching children about wildlife conservation and the sacred relationship between humans and animals. But it was more than just an educational facility. It had become a place where lost children found their way home. Native American children aging out of foster care, kids from broken homes who needed a place to heal, teenagers struggling with identity and belonging, they all found their way to the center, drawn by something they couldn't quite name, but desperately needed. Sam found himself parenting not just Ayanna and Elisa, but a constantly changing population of young people who needed to learn what the twins had learned. That love could transcend loss, that healing was possible, that some families were chosen rather than born on the center's first anniversary. As Sam watched a dozen children of various ages and backgrounds work together to care for injured wildlife, he thought about the day that had changed everything. One tornado, one choice, one act of courage in the face of impossible odds, and from that single moment, a legacy that would outlast them all. Motto emerged from his enclosure as the morning bell rang, a sound that had become the center's unofficial call to gathering. The children looked up, smiled, and continued their work. Sioux kids and white kids and black kids and Hispanic kids, all united by the understanding that some things were worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. As evening settled over the South Dakota prairie, Sam called the center's residents together for their daily gathering, a tradition that blended Sioux ceremony with the practical needs of running a wildlife education facility. What did we learn today? He asked, the same question he'd been asking for months. Hands shot up around the circle. Bears are sacred protectors, but they also need protecting. Healing takes time, but it's always possible. Family isn't just blood, it's choice. Love creates more love. Sam nodded at each answer, his heart full with the knowledge that these children would carry these lessons into the world, would become healers and teachers and protectors in their own right. And what's our promise? He asked. The voices rose. Together, Lakota and English blending in the prairie air, to protect what cannot protect itself, to heal what has been broken, to choose love over fear, always. As the children scattered to their evening chores, Ayanna and Elisa lingered by Sam's side. No longer the desperate, frightened children he'd found in a collapsed cellar, but confident, young women who knew exactly who they were and what they stood for. Papa Sam, Elisa said, using the title she'd given him that first night. Do you think Motto knows how many people he saved by protecting us? Sam looked at the bear, now 9 years old and still magnificent, still vigilant, still utterly devoted to the family he'd claimed in a tornado. I think he knows exactly what he did, he said, and I think he knows he's still doing it every single day. Motto stood on his hind legs in the evening light, not in threat, but in celebration, embracing the world he'd chosen to protect. And in that gesture, Sam saw everything that mattered: the power of sacrifice, the persistence of love, and the truth that some bonds transcend species, logic, and time itself. The bear had saved the children. Sam had saved them all, and together, they had built something that would save countless others. Love, creating more love. Always. One tornado, one choice, one act of courage that rippled outward to create a legacy that will outlast us all. If this story restored your faith in the power of one person's choice to change the world, I need you to do 3 things. Subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments about a time someone chose to help you when they didn't have to. And share this story, because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that heroes still exist in the quiet, places where no cameras roll. Thanks for spending time with us today. If this story meant something to you, pass it on. This is Still Standing Souls, real stories, quiet strength, lasting hope.